And the BBC still haven't revealed which of their star presenters they've taken off-air over allegations he paid a teenager more than £35,000 in return for sordid images. Tonight, a lawyer representing the young person has called the claims rubbish. The presenter, meanwhile, remains suspended by the BE, but with the young person's parents first making a complaint to the broadcaster on the 19th of May. And the Sun newspaper, who broke the story, maintain that they have seen evidence that supports the parents' concerns. So, as many questions remain to be answered by the Beeb, tonight I'm asking, can the broadcaster survive this latest scandal? Let me know your thoughts. Dan@gbnews.com or tweet us @gbnews and do vote in the poll. The results are coming. Doing battle tonight, I'm delighted to welcome former newspaper editor Neil Wallis and the former chief political correspondent of the BBC, John Sargent. Neil Wallis, let me start with you. How damaging could this be to the national state broadcaster?
I think it's already been damaged. I think that they need to tread very, very carefully now, because they're at last, they seem to be trying to get their house in order, despite their appalling lack of activity after this was first reported to them. But I think today's events have shown the danger for the BBC. Why has this full letter not been published? What's in it that can't be published? Why have the lawyers not been named? Because the truth of the matter is, if the lawyer firm is someone like, say, famous litigation specialist Harbottle and Lewis, they're costing thousands upon thousands of pounds a day. Who is paying for it? If it's Higgins and Mackenzie out of Slough High Street, it's a very different thing. And, you know, these things matter. Going forward, these things matter. I will tell you one thing. I don't believe this presenter's career can survive. The BBC will, because the BBC is the BBC. But this guy, his name is right across social media. He will never be able to front a programme or his programme again.
John Sargent, we don't know who this individual is, and therefore it's all speculation, isn't it? But if it turns out to be a very significant, well-known BBC face, what is the potential collateral damage to the brand?
Well, there's damage already, and it's an extremely difficult situation, but bear in mind, it's only because the BBC is so important in people's lives that we're in such a state about it. Now, if you think of it in terms of maybe a mistake has been made by the Director General and by senior management, but they can be removed, frankly. So the BBC will sail on. It may be weakened, it may be damaged by all this, but to assume that this is some titanic struggle, which at the end of it the BBC loses and is removed from our screens, that is not going to happen. The BBC will continue. How it plays out exactly, we need to know more. But some of the key questions, it seems to me, are this. First of all, in terms of the young person who we've been calling the victim, well, we don't know whether he's a victim or not. But anyway, he said it's all rubbish. Was that known to the Sun on Thursday evening? In which case, the Sun is guilty because they should have included it in their summary of the case. The second thing that matters is, so the Director General was told on Thursday evening, did nothing in terms of action until the presenter was suspended on Sunday. Well, now, wait a moment. We've had this before, haven't we, with Gary Lineker being suspended? So there's a sense in which, were the BBC acting properly and sensibly? We don't know yet. We don't know the full story. But those are two key points which will have to come out, and fairly soon.
Neil Wallis, you're shaking your head there in response to John Sargent. Do you think that the Sun are sitting on a lot of information? Have they done their due diligence here?
I think John Sargent is a great journalist. I think he's talking utter hogwash about the first one of those points. The truth of the matter is, I do know something about what the Sun has. The Sun were provided with a wealth of evidence from heartbroken parents who are not being paid, whose only motive apparently is to defend a crack addict son who apparently has received £35,000, but has now had that money tap turned off, yet they fear he is still addicted. Now, why he has now come out with this, who knows? But I do not doubt, and I am pretty sure that the evidence base from the Sun will be significant. They have not gone into this lightly. No newspaper goes into a story like this lightly in these days, maybe 20 years ago, but not now. As I say, John Sargent, great journalist, talking hogwash on point one, I'm afraid, John.
Neil, what is the Sun's next step? Do they name the star?
I don't believe they will do that in the short term. I think what's more likely is that the Star eventually will name themselves. And really, this is not going to go away. I utterly agree with John Sargent. The BBC will sail on. But to this day, we all know the scandal of Jimmy Savile. We easily remember the scandal, the sex scandal of Stuart Hall. These things linger, these things stink, these things pollute the reputation of a company. And I think that it will damage, but John's quite right, the BBC will carry on because it keeps pocketing all of our money, doesn't it?
Although, John, how many more scandals can the BBC withstand, given the fact that it's asking my viewers and listeners for £159 a year? I wonder whether it brings the idea of the licence fee into disrepute. Why should we be coughing up all this money when BBC talent allegedly can't behave themselves?
OK, well, look, if we're talking about the licence fee, it's a separate and long and detailed argument about whether you can replace it. But let me just make a very simple point.
I don't know if it is, John. I wonder whether it loses its authority. It loses its mandate.
No, but let me just make the simple point. Why does the licence fee matter? Why do people fight for the concept when in many ways it's a poll tax and you can see how unpopular all that is? No, they fight for it because in a case like this, people feel it is their BBC. It is their organisation. They therefore feel very strongly if the BBC makes a mistake, or they might have made a mistake, we can't have that because they're ours. Now, that for a brand, the BBC is the strongest international brand that this country has.
What would you say?
And it's because of the licence fee connection with every single person that pays the licence fee. But let's not get into a long discussion about what happens to the licence fee, because that is not it's not the topic right at the moment. The topic at the moment is what are they going to do about this particular crisis?
But John, I mean, you talk about the public and this attachment they've got to the BBC. I'm inundated with emails to this show every time we go on air about how fed up many of the public are with the BBC.
Sure.
And it's why they're choosing other media sources that don't cost them £159 a year.
Well, no, that's not the only reason why they go to other sources. No, they can choose what they want to watch. But that is, honestly, it's a separate issue at the moment. The BBC is in crisis. How will this be resolved? Can the BBC escape this, or will, in fact, it do very, very serious damage to the BBC? That, I think, is the point to consider this evening, rather than, so, the BBC's finished, is it or isn't it? I don't think that's really the relevant argument tonight.
John Sargent, Neil Wallis, thank you so much for joining us. Interesting words there. John Sargent, very clear that BBC will survive this. Yes, it's not great for their reputation, but ultimately it will prevail. Neil Wallis says that in terms of The Sun and this story, there's plenty more where that came from. So can the BBC survive this alleged sex scandal? Your views are coming in thick and fast. Peter has said the real question should be, can The Sun survive? Darnell has said, if ever there was a reason to defund the BBC, by God, this is it. And Jahangir said, sadly, yes, the government isn't going to let its main propaganda arm just die. Well, your verdict is now in. 44% say the BBC can survive this alleged scandal. A majority of 56 say no, it's game over for the organisation.